to have the ecosystem managed well with all the touch points. That way, maybe we can combat the things. So,
Another trend, Pallavi, that specific to international A2Ps, which is a bit worrying now, is also the kind of growth that the aggregators and the firewall providers, etc., are seeing, and the hunger for growth that has propelled, which leads to some worrying trends like traffic generation or artificial inflation of markets, which eventually could end up, shooting ourselves on the foot, and we could encourage the OTTs to move on to different channels rather than come to A2P messaging.
correct.
So while we are chasing growth, that's great, but we also need to be mindful of keeping the industry alive and thriving for longer.
Correct. Shikha would like to add something.
I just wanted to talk, see, we're talking more of international, but the larger market is domestic.
Correct.
So the commercial model, I understand for the international part is important, but I think the biggest consumption of messaging as a channel is more on the local brands. So we spoke about regulation. You can really regulate the telecom operators. I haven't seen any regulation coming on the OTT channels.
Correct.
So the example I gave you in India, we all know, the UCC regulation was there to stop scam, the unsolicited messages. We were successful to an extent, but what happened?
What happened?
The messages, spam moved to mobile numbers. So you see SIM farms coming up.
Correct.
You stop SIM farms, something else comes up. So now it's moved to DLT now, right?
Correct.
So the question is, international, I understand most of us are from the international side, but the larger problem to solve, I think, is domestic.
Domestic side.
Commercial might not be the right approach there. We need technology. We have deployed blockchain, which is the largest deployment and the first deployment across the globe
Correct.
to control this menace. But it hasn't succeeded that well because there are reasons why it's not. The technology itself will never be successful. You have to have a lot of strong processes along with that.
Correct.
There has to be a strong intervention from the regulator. There has to be penalties for people who are actually creating scam or fraud out of those.
So this DLT platform has been implemented in India. So before DLT and after DLT, what are the changes you see from the domestic market?
See, DLT, before DLT, yes, they were limited, there was firewall too. You did not know what was going in. So with DLT, what has happened is there is an enterprise which registers, there's a template registration, sender registration. But when they were registering those templates, I think there was not enough guidance available, so nobody knew what's going to come up. So there are so many templates with variables. There are millions of templates which have been created which are never going to be used. Okay. Now, if you see recently, the government has come out, okay, clean up the templates. Why should there be so many variables? Principal entities should be, penalized. The telemarketers should be penalized. So those are the things which they are bringing because they are seeing it is being misused.
Correct.
Right? So many frauds are happening. Frauds are happening from SIM farms, the banking applications.
In fact, recently it has been increased.
Yeah, it has increased actually.
Yeah.
So we say you've automated fraud now.
Right.
The blockchain.
Right.
It's actually automated because you've registered the template and the data is accessed because principal entities are not doing it themselves.
Correct.
They're outsourcing that activity to someone and they have access to all the templates.
Correct.
Right? So a message, if we talk about international, which you were talking about, a message from an international app is coming through DLT from some other name.
Other name.
Right. The OTP is there, so it is.
You
OTP
can just put
there.
the OTP, yeah. Even if it is from Facebook, it will just.
Fraud, right?
Correct.
So when you talk about trust, there is where the trust is lost.
Correct.
So as an enterprise, there is a channel available. So it's a commercial model for international, but what happens in domestic?
Domestic market.
Domestic,
right.
the same fight. There is a price a telco is charging. There's a price which the aggregators are charging.
Correct.
There is definitely something going on. So many things happen.
Right, right.
So it's a question of how do we build that trust back. So as an industry, I totally agree with what he said, that we have to collaborate.
Correct.
And together we have to, address the end consumer has to be safe.
So my next question is the same, like what role do industry standards and regulations play in combating this messaging fraud? Domestic, international, both. Domestic is major key, I'll say, because the pie is very big. So what should be the industry standards or the regulations?
Sharing, see, you can't really have the same regulation across the globe.
Correct.
Knowledge sharing is very important. So if you talk about, if I take an example of GSMA, so you can share, or MEF.
MEF for that matter, thanks to James.
Have a long sharing of, knowledge amongst operators, but that's only going to be one channel.
Correct.
What happens to the other channels? you cannot, the governments are not able to regulate the OTT channels. There is no
Do you think
government.
enterprises coming together will create something, will have some regulations, maybe from the regulator side, or
So yeah, we have to try it out. Then,
educate them?
so see, they also know what happens.
Right.
It's not the enterprises don't know. Ultimately, they go after the commercial.
Correct.
When there is large scale fraud happens, then they go here and then as to how do I stop it? How do I safeguard
Right.
myself? So the enterprise, the consumer safety is the most important.
Right.
Enterprise and the channel, I would not say telco, I would say the channel which
Channel.
is being used has
Right.
to work together. How do they safeguard the consumers? I think that's the key to uh, build trust in the channel.
So this is like we know because we are based in India, we know the market is huge. I think similar cases in Indonesia as well. And Nan must be aware, like if you would like to throw some highlights from Indonesian market, because that market is also one of the largest market for enterprises. So how do you feel, like, what are the challenges over there?
Yeah. So as we all know that the A2P rate, Indonesia is known for the highest A2P rate, termination international rate. So it started with, as Shalini mentioned, the commercial model. Initially, it was available at as low as 1 cent. Then it grew to 2, then 2.5, 7, 8, and then now it's
23.
at 23. Yeah. So the commercial model also plays important role here, as she mentioned rightly, because the enterprises and OTTs, they are now looking for alternate channels for their authentication traffic, right? That's how you see the emerging trend of OTTs or other business messaging apps to, send your transactional, utility, marketing related messages. So Telkomsel being the leading operator in Indonesia, and the mobile penetration rate we are seeing as high as almost 130%.
But again, this is from the international perspective, but are you facing the similar challenges like India in domestic market of Indonesia?
Yeah. So for domestic, as Shikha mentioned, in India we have DLT, right? So in Indonesia, it's not very easy to implement that technology because you need to have support from all the MNOs. They should reach out to the regulator and get this implemented. So definitely there's a challenge, and we need to come together. All the MNOs have to come together and
Okay.
approach the regulator
Yeah.
to implement such kind of technology there.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good. Good. So, what are some best practices for implementing security measures in messaging system? Like, I think you have already started something on this part, so you can put some highlights over there.
Sure. Coming to that, as you asked in the previous question, what are the emerging trends that we see, or a threat for the messaging? So as we all know that the global A2P market is closer to 66 billion worldwide, and over the decade, MNOs have been, recording this kind of revenue. And with that, the highest revenue, I would say closer to 60% is generated out of authentication, right? Because we see more and more consumers are moving towards digital solutions like post-pandemic, right? Everyone, has access to all the apps. That's how the authentication traffic is increasing. And with that, we see emergence of flash call, which is like a
Right.
free rider or
One more
MNOs
threat, yeah.
network. Yeah. So that is a new area of concern for MNOs. So how do we combat with that? So best practice, I would say, is to implement flash call mitigation solution. So a lot of companies, I would say, they are still, doing research on how do we do this.
Right.
So first we need to identify if it is a flash call. Different types of algorithms can be built.
Yeah.
Then identify, then we can block it. If we find, let's say, repeat A numbers, we are getting the calls, or static or dynamic algorithms can be implemented.
Right.
And then we can take the right action. The MNOs can take the right action in terms of blocking or allowing the call to pass, right?
So flash call is the one more emerging threat, I will say, for the messaging ecosystem, we can say, because messaging business, it's a commercial business, right? But this kind of things are deteriorating the growth. Or maybe I think Tech Lab has developed some solution on this. Kunal, if you have something to say.
Yes, we have developed the flash call mitigation and active blocking solution. Works on real time and purely on the signaling side. We are talking about threat of flash call, as Shalini highlighted because of the flash call. I'm sorry, Shika highlighted. Nayan, I'm sorry. So, as she highlighted that because of the increase in flash call, the SMSs volumes are dropping and the revenues are losing. I think that's just the business aspect of it. But when you come on the technological aspect of it, we see there are people who receive a missed call and their bank account gets empty. There was a very classical case few months back here in India.
Yes.
The typical missed call was essentially a flash call, and the transaction was authenticated automatically. So
Big threat.
it is a serious threat. Apart from business side, it is a very serious threat on the consumer side as well, which has to be
Correct.
actively mitigated. So whenever this kind of a solution is opted by a telco for an implementation, the focus should not be on monetizing it, but protecting their customers.
Got it, got it. Any highlights?
Just
Shravani?
to elaborate a bit on the mitigation solutions, telcos today are living, rather surviving in a world where retaining a customer is a lot easier, a lot cheaper than acquiring a new customer.
Correct.
So just to add a European angle to it, since I am representing Orange, according to Europol's cybersecurity data, last year in 2022, telcos lost close to $10.6 billion just from the security leaks.
Correct.
So in such scenarios, it's very important for the regulator to step in and to ensure that the customers don't lose faith in the services. One of the biggest originators for SMS is the payment cards industry.
Right.
So in the EU, it is mandatory for us to comply with the standards set by PCI, DSS, and GDPR.
Right.
Of course, in Orange, that's being followed as well. And then coming to the operator side, how they